Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our series of webinars for 2023, presented by the BES-Net TT project. My name is Celeste Chariandi, and I am the project's Science Communication Officer. And I take this opportunity to welcome all of you, our visitors, our listeners, our attendees. I take the opportunity to send you greetings and best wishes for the new year, which is also the final year of the BES-Net TT project. This afternoon's webinar comes after a short break and a few postponements, so we know that you're very eager to attend today's webinar to learn about a very interesting topic, stingless bees. And this will be presented in the main by Dr. Lena Dempelwolf, biodiversity specialist. In addition, we continue with a short segment on plants that are pollinated by stingless bees, which will be shared by Mr. Shane Bala, the project manager of the BES-Net TT project. Now, just to give a little bit further introduction, our webinar series selects topics on the basis of information that the project believes is key to share with the public. Teach attitudes and practices survey, and 65% of respondents to that survey indicated that they were aware of our native bees, but just about 35% of persons indicated that they thought them to be important pollinators. Some 51% of respondents said they had heard about the stingless bees, but even so, some 71% were still interested in finding out more and learning a lot more about these bees. For instance, what species do we have in Trinidad and how can they be reared? So we hope that in presenting on the topic of stingless bees today, we're able to build knowledge and expand your curiosity about these bees so that you can eventually play a part in conserving them. A few housekeeping rules before we start. The session will be recorded on Zoom, and this recording will be shared on the BES-Net TT Facebook page and the BES-Net YouTube channel. We will have a brief question and answer segment at the end of the presentation. And so even while they're being delivered, you can post any questions that you have in the Q&A area that you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We wish to keep the webinar to 1 hour duration. So if owing to time, it is not possible to answer some of your questions, these will be addressed afterwards and will be posted with the recording of the session on the Facebook page. So our first presenter today is Dr. Lena Dempelwolf, biodiversity specialist of the Environmental Policy and Planning Division, Ministry of Planning and Development, who is also a member of the BES-Net TT project team. Lena's presentation today gives an introduction to stingless bees, and therefore I hand you over now to Dr. Dempelwolf.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your patience with our webinar. And, you know, being here today, let me just open up my thing. I should be able to share. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Lena.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So yes, thank you very much for being here today. Hope you can see and hear me. Well, not really see me, but see my presentation and hear me okay. We're having a few technical issues, so you can't see my face, but I'm pretty sure you are tired of that by now anyway. All right, so introduction to stingless bee biology. So I'm going to give you a very brief background. Here you see some lovely Nanotrigona peeking out of their hive. Waiting on the slide to change. Great, and we're frozen. Okay, great. All right, So the name comes from the possession of a reduced stinger that cannot be used for defense. So some or more, well, all stingless bees are by their nature stingless, and therefore they won't use that as a defense mechanism. Some, however, are able to bite. So for example, Trigona is a little bit aggressive when you get near to their hives. If you come nearby, they will bite and tangle and roll up in your hair and try to go in your ears and nose and so on. But the majority of them is actually relatively docile, and they won't even try to do that. They are not the only ones. All males and most female bees of several other species also cannot sting or do not sting. So on a whole, this big myth about, bees being dangerous, bees being able to injure you, it's not really true. Stingless bees are social. They construct hives and they produce honey. And they differ from most bees in that sense, because most bees are not social. Most bees, the vast majority of bees, are actually solitary. They don't produce honey, and most of them actually live in the ground. They're the largest group of eusocial bees on Earth, and eusocial bees are bees that have colonies with adults of 2 generations, castes, and division of labor. So they have different groups that are assigned to different activities. And there's cooperative work going on brood cells, and they are permanent colonies in this case in particular. Once they establish something, the original colony cannot and does not move, very different from honeybees. So they remain in the same place. Stingless bees belong to the tribe Meliponidae, so you'll hear me using that word off and on, and they produce honey and other products that are used by humans. There is a community of Meliponidae beekeepers in Trinidad and Tobago. It used to be much more common for people to keep stingless bees. It was more of a cultural thing that has sort of been dwindling a little bit. So we're hoping that we can help revive that a bit. They're important pollinators of crops and native plants, especially for us, because we have several endemic species, and these are often pollinated by stingless bees and native bees on a whole. And they have an important role to play in maintaining Trinidad and Tobago's biodiversity through pollination. They also contribute significantly to agriculture and to food production. So stingless bees are important in many ways for us. In terms of evolution and classification, bees generally evolve from predatory wasps, and bees are effectively vegetarian or herbivorous wasps. They do not feed on anything but nectar and pollen and so on. Stingless bees are most closely related to bumblebees. We do not have bumblebees in Trinidad and Tobago. People tend to think that the very large black bees that fly around are bumblebees. They're not. They are carpenter bees. So we don't have any of those, but that's what they're most closely related to. And they have been thought to originate over 100 million years ago, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, on the Gondwana continent. And it is, they have the greatest diversity of stingless bees is found in the neotropics. So the neotropics is the Caribbean, South and Central America. And that's where you find the greatest diversity of these bees. So the greatest number of species. And on your left, there's a diagram of a wasp. And you can tell that that looks very, very similar to a bee. So just to give you an idea of what groups of bees there are out there, there are 7 major groups. And this is actually a nice diagram that shows when these evolved over time, but I don't really want to go too much into that. What I really wanted to highlight here for you are the 4 groups that you will find in Trinidad and Tobago. So you find the Apidae, the Megachilidae or Megachilidae, Halictidae, and the Coletidae. Those are the 4 groups of bees that you will find in this country. So one more time, those are our major families, and the Apidae are the ones that include orchid bees, our stingless bees that we're going to be talking about, as well as carpenter bees, so the large, big black bees. Coletidae is mostly small solitary bees. Halictidae are called sweat bees as well. And then there's Megachilidae or Megachilidae, depending on how you like to pronounce the word. And those are leaf cutter bees. They take pieces of the leaves. They cut very small round holes into leaves and use that to construct their nests to rear their offspring. So just to show you where we are at in terms of bee classification, the apody, what we just talked about, those are part of the long-tongued bees, which is self-explanatory. And within the apody, you will see the family, oh, sorry, that's actually the tribe, Meliponini, that has a red circle around it. And this is how they are classified. In terms of abundance and distribution of the species, 417 species have been reported from the Neotropics. So again, that's the Caribbean, Central and South America, and it is the most diverse region. More than 500 species are found globally. So there are quite a few species. And if you compare this, for instance, because people always ask, you know, they always try to compare all of Meliponini to honeybees, but honeybees are really just 3 or 4 species. And the honeybee that we know for most of this part of the world is just one species, which is Apis mellifera. So when we talk about Meliponini, we are talking about 500 species, and all of them have their own habits, their own requirements, their own needs. So it's very difficult to wrap all of these into one big bundle and talk about them, but we'll try to give you a bit of a background on it. As for global distribution, this is where you find them around the planet. So as you can tell, they prefer tropical environments. They are not found anywhere where there are cold climates or winter or anything like that. For the Caribbean islands, and this took quite a bit of digging. Now, these are the species that have been recorded throughout the Caribbean. In Trinidad and Tobago, this is quite a long list. I have never seen some of these species, and I have not heard of people reporting them. However, they are present in the literature. So Cephalotrigona capitata, for instance, is something that I have not seen or heard of here. Physiomylitta purpura is also called petit angel. People tend to refer to it as Physiomylitta nigra, but when you look at the classification, this is the proper description. The 2 species of Lestrimylitta are kleptoparasitic, so it means that they go into the nests of other stingless bees and they steal their honey. They themselves produce honey. However, the honey is toxic. So those are not species to keep and not honey to consume. So you have to know what these look like so that you don't accidentally consume their honey. There are 2 species of Melipona that I have come into contact with, which is the Favosa and the Trinitatis. Melipona lateralis is also listed. Again, we haven't seen any of these around. Nanotrigona testasicornis is very prevalent, as well as the plebea, the various species of plebea. There's a species of plebea that is unique to Tobago, which is the tobagoensis. And Patamona nigrioa and Trigona amalthea are the 2 species that are a bit more on the aggressive side. Everybody else is relatively docile. These 2 are the ones that defend their nest if you go near it by biting. They don't possess any kind of venom or anything like that, so nothing major is going to happen. But if you do keep those species, you might have to wear some sort of headgear to protect your eyes and ears and face. All of the others are extremely docile. So we have also found species in Cuba, Dominica, the Dominican Republic, Guadeloupe, Jamaica, and Montserrat. But as you can tell, the biggest variety and diversity is found in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is a map showing you where within the Caribbean stingless bees have been found and identified. So Trinidad and Tobago, obviously, because we're very close to South America, then there's a cluster around Guadeloupe, Martinique, Dominica, and then you have the very large islands up to the top that's where some species have been found. In terms of nesting habitats, there again, because we're talking about an extremely large diversity of species, everybody has different preferences. So they could be nesting in hollow tree trunks, tree branches, underground cavities, old termite nests, and rock crevices. In many cases, you will also find them in wall cavities, roofs, drums, and barrels. And And a very artificial habitat would be a bee box. So bee boxes are made of either log hives or bamboo, can be made of coconut shells, flower pots, recycling containers, and so on. Again, it depends on what kind of pests you have around the area that you need to protect them from, what the species are, what location you're in terms of climates and rainfall and so on. So all of that will inform what kind of hive that you're looking. So what I have there on the bottom on the left-hand side is a picture of something very similar to what people use in Trinidad and Tobago, which is just a plain box. And this is sort of the most popular design over here. In terms of the hive structure and social behavior, again, they're highly eusocial. So again, they have a caste system. They rear their young with different castes. They have specific roles assigned to different species, and they live together in a hive. So sorry, different roles assigned to different castes, my bad, species. They store pollen and honey separately in egg-shaped pots. So this is different to honeybees for sure. Hence, their honey is often called pot honey. And the pots are made of a material called cerumen, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And they are arranged around a central set of horizontal brood combs. So the brood combs, which house the larvae, are located at the center, and the pots are arranged around the outside. Young workers often have a whole range of jobs, but the older workers are often used as guards or foragers. The remainder of the nest cavity and the entrance tubes are lined with something called propolis. And the hives contain usually between 300 and 80,000 workers, and that really depends on the species. So some species have very few workers, and as a consequence will produce much less honey. And some have a whole lot and produce a whole lot more honey. In terms of reproduction, whether a bee is male or female is determined by a process called haplodiploidy. Basically, it means that the queen can decide whether her offspring will be male or female. If the eggs are fertilized, they are female. If the eggs are unfertilized, they turn into males. Queens are determined by the quantity of pollen fed and genetic components, and this is very different because in honeybees, they're usually fed a royal jelly, which will then determine a queen. So this is determined differently in stingless bees, but there are also differences between species here again. So it depends on what species it is. Larvae are not actively fed by adults, but rather pollen, nectar, and the egg are placed in a sealed cell. And as opposed to honeybees where there's continuous feeding. New nests are established by a group of workers constructing a nest at a nearby location over time, and then they're joined by a mated queen. So it's a gradual process, which means that there are workers flying out, they're establishing a new nest site, and the new queen will also take some of the workers from the original hive across with her. The queen in general, at a certain point is too large to fly. And once they establish a nest, they remain at that site and they cannot move, which is why it's such a problem when they're facing threats, because the hive cannot move to another location. A new queen can replace an older or dying queen, and a soldier caste was actually for the first time identified in 2012 in stingless bees. Before, it was only found in things like ants and related organisms, but for the first time, it was their realization that Meliponidae also have soldier castes. Right. So cerumen versus propolis. In my research, this is something that has come up for me a few times where I wasn't quite sure what the differences were, so I figured I'll put in a slide on this. So these are two materials that are used by stingless bees. Propolis is a resin-like substance. It's also called bee glue. Cerumen is more of a construction material on the whole. The composition for propolis is that it's salivary secretions, beeswax, pollen, and other resins harvested from botanical sources, mainly trees. And the precise composition varies on all kinds of things, as you see there. And it also depends, again, on the species, on the location, and so on. Cerumen is a mixture of propolis in addition to wax that is secreted by the bees. And bees use propolis to close gaps and control diseases, and they use cerumen mostly for nest construction. There's a variation to propolis called geopropolis, which is less malleable, and it's produced only by some species, and it's mixed with additional materials such as soil or clay. Sorry, my slides are sticking a little bit. Okay. In terms of defense, they possess a reduced stinger, but they cannot sting. Again, hence stingless. Some bite, so Trigona, for instance, will bite and defend itself. Some species, for example, a genus called Oxytona, which is not found in Trinidad and Tobago, they have mandibular secretions that can include formic acid, for instance, and that causes blisters and burning. So some of them do have additional defenses, but not the species that we have here. Large numbers allow for good defense against threats. So obviously, the larger the hive, the larger the numbers within the hive, the better. And within the Trinidad and Tobago species, only Trigona is known to effectively defend itself against Apis mellifera. So actually, in the picture on the left there, you're seeing a honeybee bullying a small stingless bee off the flower. And I have a series of pictures to prove that that's actually what's happening there. Because the honeybees do push them off the flowers, bully them away from resources and so on. And the only species that that's ever been observed really to defend itself effectively against Apis bees in this scenario is usually Trigona. Some species are also more capable of defending against phorid flies than others. And I'm going to get to the phorid flies in a little bit. That's a very well-known parasitoid of stingless bees, especially in this part of the world. In terms of food and other forage requirements, they require nectar, pollen, and resin. The resin is mostly for construction purposes, as we just talked about. And I think Shane will talk a little bit about where they get the resin from a little bit later. And other than that, Trigona amalthea, for instance, is often seen feeding on fallen fruit. Some people complain that they tend to go on their citrus and eat some of the citrus. That may be true, yes, but the easy solution there is to relocate the nest and even box them for honey. Patamona nigrioa has also been observed foraging for animal droppings, and they use this to construct outer components of their hive. The inside does not touch any animal droppings, so the honey is not contaminated or anything. It's just the outside, the very outside of the hive itself. In terms of honey production, bees collect pollen on pollen baskets. So those are wide areas on the last leg pair that is where they can stick the pollen to. And nectar, when they go out forage, is stored in a gut extension called a crop. And then the nectar droplets are then ripened or dehydrated by being spun within their mouth parts, and that forms the honey. The honey and pollen are stored in separate pots. And Meliponini honey contains more water than Apis honey. So the disadvantage there is that it tends to spoil faster because it has a higher water content. So it's recommended that if people try to export honey or just on a whole sell it commercially, that pasteurization or further dehydration is recommended to increase shelf life, but that's a separate conversation. So plant resins, I used to build the nest components. They can affect the taste of the honey, and generally very small quantities are produced. So what I've seen in literature is anywhere between 1 and 12 liters, but again, it can vary, and that's for a year. However, that being said, there are operations in South and Central America that have over 500 years that produce gallons and gallons and gallons of honey every year to the point where they can sell it commercially. So it's a matter of increasing your beehives, really. Flower availability is the main limitation to honey production. If you want more honey, plant more flowers, and often this is also used, the honey is also used for medicinal purposes and for their medicinal properties, as well as for food. So there are a whole number of benefits associated with using stingless bee honey in particular. Right, this brings me to the phorid flies. So one of the major issues in keeping stingless beehives in Trinidad has been sort of the issue of phorid flies. They're also called coffin flies, which should give you an idea of how pervasive they are in terms of and how serious they are about getting into something. They dig holes into things and they get in. So they're about 2 to 3 millimeters long for the most part. And this particular group of forage flies, so forage flies is a very large group and they parasitize different things. However, the Melaleuca species, that group of forage flies is what is the biggest issue for parasitism, or being parasitoids, really. They're almost exclusively found in the Neotropics, so again, on our side of the planet. And they're parasitoids, meaning that parasites generally want their hosts to live and continue because they depend on them. Parasitoids eventually end up killing their hosts. They also parasitize other species, including Apis mellifera, and native species, such as Megalopter. Megalopter is the only genus of nocturnal bee that we have in Trinidad. Female flies attack adult bees, and they inject an egg through a membranous area between the exoskeleton plates, and then obviously the larvae hatches and eats the bee. And that becomes a very big problem if you have these flies in large numbers. There are approximately 170 known species of the Melaleuca genus, and I'm not entirely sure how many of these exist in Trinidad, but I can check up on that. In terms of parasites, and out of this paper in particular, there were 3 out of the 4 I found in Trinidad and Tobago for sure. I was not able to verify the beetle. It has become invasive in a lot of countries, and I think I've seen spread down to Jamaica for sure. There's a very good chance it exists there as well. So keep an eye out for this one. So the top right is the beetle, which is another parasite of stingless bees. And then we have the bottom left being the lesser wax moth. Bottom middle is the manted lacewing, and the bottom right would be the mite found in Trinidad that also can parasitize those hives. In terms of diseases, most diseases are transmitted via honeybees, and they're mostly transmitted via flowers and shared resources with honeybees. So the additional question is, I'm not sure how many of you have seen that there's a bee vaccine that has been advertised lately for American foul brood. And the question is, to what extent does this affect native species? Because we don't know. There's a really great resource on this. This is a nice paper that reviews the threats to survival of stingless bees, which I have listed there. You can have a look at it, and it's also open access, so that's good. And from this, I've just taken this table very quickly. I'm just going to run through and see. The idea is to just give you a background on what is out there. And there are actually quite a few diseases that affect these species. The thing about distribution is, do we have these here? Yes or no, we don't know. But given the imports of queens for honeybees, and that honeybees are the major spreader of these things. And in addition to that, if it is that we do have honey moving in and out of countries, there's a greater chance of these diseases being spread and then also being passed on to native species, including stingless bees. So there are a few pages of this. I just wanted to give you an overview. And again, you can find this in the same paper that I identified there. If you're interested in spending some more time looking at what might affect your bees if it is that you're keeping them. Right. In terms of human uses and cultural importance, so we use it for food and honey. We can also use it for honey products, mead, soaps, medical uses, and so on. I also read that it was traditionally used in some parts of South America, I think Brazil, for producing a special kind of alcohol, a special kind of honey that was grown next to psychoactive plants that produce certain effects and so on. So there are very niche markets for this kind of thing as well. Obviously it's used as medicine, the propolis as well, but also the honey. People use it for eye drops, for cataract and similar things. We can also use these kinds of bees as bioindicators, in the sense that they will tell us from the honey, for instance, we can sample the honey and see whether or not there's certain pesticides in the area, whether or not there's certain heavy metals and so on. It can give you an idea of the health of the ecosystem as well. They also have serious cultural significance. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's been sort of a heritage of this as well. A significant component, they do form a significant component of Mayan culture, and in general in Central and South America, they're closely linked with culture, which is also a reason why they should be conserved and preserved. In terms of pollination, they co-evolve with native plants and they are superior to, pollinators to honeybees, and some of them have very specific roles. For example, the Phrisiomylitta, the Pithiangel, that is very much associated with avocado pollination. If you have those around, you'll get a very large avocado crop. We are developing a plant pollinator catalog, which will also speak to what stingless bees feed on, what kind of plants they are good to plant around them, and that kind of thing. So all of that will come soon, but Shane will also have some more information on that a little bit. In terms of the threats, pesticides always a huge issue. Malathion among the many, many things that are really bad for them. But when you think pesticides, it's not just agricultural pesticides and what you're spraying around. It's also the pesticides at home. And this is something to think about because most people wouldn't really think about, you know, the little pesticide spray that you have at home to kill your cockroaches and so on. Those actually have a huge impact as well. And climate change is always a problem. We don't quite know how this will affect stingless bees in tropical climates as yet. But definitely having hotter days, more unpredictable rainfall patterns is going to have an impact. Deforestation, habitat destruction is always a problem, especially because the queens are too heavy to fly and move. If a tree is felled and the nest comes down, that's the end of that hive. The hive itself can go on for very long periods of time because the old queens can be replaced by new queens. But if habitat is destroyed, nesting habitat as well as feeding habitat is destroyed, you're going to have a decline in populations. Destructive honey collection is another thing. So people may cut down a tree to get to the honey, but not do anything about relocating the nest. That can also have big impact. And then generally just lack of knowledge of the species and what you need. Right, conservation, what can you do? You can learn about stingless bees, first of all. You can keep stingless bees. You can reduce or eliminate pesticide use. You can plant native plants with overlapping flowering periods. So very important that there's something always flowering because you need food. You can provide habitats, so hollow logs and other cavities that they tend to like to go into. You can reduce cutting grass. And I know it sounds silly, but all these tiny little weed plants that flower throughout the year, they provide a whole lot of food for stingless and native bees. So the less you cut or the less frequently you cut, the more of those flowers are around and the more food you provide. And yeah, keep the weeds. Or even if you don't want it over your whole yard, keep a corner or keep a perimeter of those. And that significantly improves the food quality and quantity that you have for stingless bees and other native bees and pollinators. Right, so that's it for me. Thank you very much. Just wanted to give you guys a quick introduction and background, and there will be more resources of this kind available. So I hope this was informative. Thanks.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Dr. Dempelwolf, for that very interesting presentation. And I'm sure it's built our collective knowledge of these very important species. I see that we have 5 questions, so I think we should get into the 5 questions just before we go on to the presentation by Mr. Bala, and I will quickly read them out for you. The first one is, can stingless bees be raised in residential areas? I think you're muted, Lena.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just realized. So yes, stingless bees can be raised in residential areas. There's some clarity that we need to get on this because the Beekeeping Act basically speaks to bees on a whole. So we're going to look into that and work on that. But generally, yes, it can be kept in residential areas. Yes, it can be kept in your house. It can be kept anything. Especially the species that don't bite, you can have them anywhere. I'm also seeing someone ask about whether stingless bees, they have stingless bees growing on their house and should they be concerned or not? No, there's no risk. If it is that you do have the species, the Trigona species that gets a little nippy, believe me, you would have known by now. You can happily leave them alone where they are, or if you wanted to box them and get the honey, let us know and see if we can link you up with somebody that might be able to help you box them for you and teach you a little bit about keeping them. so that you also get the honey and you can benefit from them. But generally, if you see them in a wall, in a house, in a whatever, and if you are near the hive and they have not come out yet to try to bite you, they're not gonna either. So yes, it's safe.
Okay. And which species do humans long history of honey production in Trinidad?
Sorry, say that again.
Which species is honey collected from in Trinidad? And is there a long history of honey production in Trinidad?
Yes, so there is a long history in the sense that people used to do it for their own consumption. You can produce honey and sell it. Mostly people buy it for medicinal purposes, and it goes for as much as $50 to $75 for a teaspoon. Which species do we collect from? Almost all of them. Obviously not the kleptoparasitic ones, so not Lestromilita, because the honey is poisonous, but the others, all of them, as far as I know, produce honey. The one that is difficult to manage is the Patamona, because it doesn't like to stay in the bee boxes. So that one is a bit of a challenge, but all the others that I know of have certainly been kept for honey production. So incidentally, Trigona, which is the bitey one, is the one that has been very popular for honey, and that the honey is very good from there. So any of them really. Melipona, I think, is the most popular, just because they produce the most amount of honey, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, and then there's a question about species. Catherine is saying, I know you said information on other Caribbean islands is difficult to find, but isn't Montserrat stingless bee a subspecies? Melipona variegatipes lotipes.
Yeah, you could be, I don't know. Possibly, I am not sure. The information came from a neotropical bee catalog. So I painstakingly went through and looked up every single species of stingless bee that I can find. But there's a very good chance that that is the case. I can check that for you if it's anything, but yeah, you could be absolutely right.
Okay, I'm going to allow these 3 more questions, only if we answer very quickly. The first one I think you already touched upon, which is how do they protect themselves?
Yeah, just very quickly, I mean, just in terms of numbers, they might bite or attack somebody as large as a human being that they would not necessarily bother with. Again, some of these species, I have only experienced this recently when we went to look at a hive at Wasamaki, and I said, hey, I want to see, what it looks like. And we went close, and those Trigona bees, you will know, they fly into you like little bombers, and they go and bite and roll up in your hair and try to go in your nose and your ears and everything. So they're quite good at it. And generally, the nest entrance is extremely tiny, and they always have guards around the outside. So one way or the other, if anything comes close to that, a lot of bees come swarming out and try to distract whatever is trying to get in there.
Okay, would these bees be able to cross with stinger bees?
No, they're distinct species, so there's no way that they can do that.
And when do you know when the honey is ready to harvest for stingless bees?
It's similar with honeybees. I mean, they do usually people harvest stingless bees, I think once a year or twice a year, something like that. So it's not nearly as frequent. But generally, they from what I know, beekeepers tend to only open it in the dry season, mostly because of the issue with the forage flies. And I see something about nocturnal bees in Trinidad. Yes, we do have one species at least of nocturnal bee called Megalopter. They are, however, solitary. So they can live in aggregates with other female bees for nest laying purposes, but it's not really a social situation. But we do have them. We have one species. You might see them at night around your lights. And yeah, they are on night shift.
Okay, great. So thanks, members of the audience, for your very interesting and varied questions, and Lena for your rapid fire responses.
Sorry about that. I'm conscious of time.
Yes. So we'll now move on to the second presentation by Mr. Bala. Mr. Shane Bala is an environmental consultant, and he has a strong educational background in ecology, plant-insect interactions, and botany, and he is the project manager for the BES-Net TT project. So he continues continues a series that was started last year in our webinar, the feature within our webinar series on plants that attract particular pollinators. And today he will be discussing plants that attract stingless bees. So I hand you over to Shane.
All right, good day, everyone. Celeste, can you allow me to share? Or am I able to? Celeste, are you hearing me?
Yes, I think you already.
I already have
I think
the
you already have
sharing power. Let's see if I got that.
Sorry, I think I just closed my share, so you should be able to.
Right, so you should be seeing my screen. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So I don't have much time. This is actually some material. What I'm going to present to you is information that was presented at our workshop at Wasamaki, and then some. So there's some additional information here. The time is limited, but I want to be able to go through at least some of the basics of what plants you may want to consider. And I think one of the first things up front is for us to have a look at, I'm going to skip the bit on stingless bees, because Lena has already covered that. So you understand the taxonomy and you understand all the different species. This is a particular text that I came across for those of you who want more information, and I'll put up some other references at the end of this presentation that you can go through for information on stingless bees, and in particular for information on plants that they visit. There's a lot of information cited here, a lot of articles, both from Africa and South America and so on. So that's just a good reference for you that you can dig up in your own time. All right, so let me say from the onset, because we need to have a sense of what bees are going to plants for. Now, Nina would have touched on some of this, but what are they really foraging for? The three things at the top there in yellow are the main things. They're looking for nectar for energy requirements. And I'll explain in a while that nectar can be from both floral and extrafloral sources. And the extrafloral sources are perhaps in times when plants aren't flowering are more important than we may give them credit for. They're going for pollen, and this serves as a protein source for them and other nutritional needs. And also, very important, they're going to collect resin. Yeah, resin is used for nest building and for making the pots and for a number of other things. I'll explain a bit later on what resin is, because I think we need to understand that clearly, because there's a bit of confusion between resin and plant sap and so forth. So other things that the bees are collecting include water for cooling hives and metabolic processes. They will collect soil and sand particles for nest building, and of course, twigs and plant materials for nest building. But the top three are the main ones that we're going to concern ourselves with in terms of the plants that I'm going to put out for you. All right, so I mentioned resins. So this comes up a lot. Resin is not plant sap. Yeah, it's also not cell sap. Of course, we use the terms interchangeably, but in the normal scheme of things, the resin can be produced from any organ or tissue, but it's usually produced by specific glands. And that's a key difference here. I'll show you in a while that plant sap, or what we tend to call plant sap, is really stuff that's coming from your vascular tissue. What does that mean? It's coming out from your xylem and your phloem. Those are your two big channels that are either carrying water. Basic biology, for those who have done any bit of science, water from the ground goes up to the plants, or water can come from other sources. Vessels carry water, and in the plant, there are vessels that are carrying the photosynthate. That's the stuff that the plant produces. Yeah. Of course, this applies to your non-vascular plants. I should say that from the onset, that we're focusing on non-vascular plants here. So resin in itself is a product that's unique. Sap, as I mentioned before, is the fluid transported in the xylem cells, yeah, or the phloem seed tubes. Again, different from resin and also different from cell sap. Yeah, of course, if you were to go and cut a plant and stuff starts to ooze out, then there's a mixture of things coming inside there. Now, why this distinction is important is because, again, we talk about stingless bees being attracted to plants for their resin. And so you'll want to make sure that some of the plants that you're going to put in provide them with a source of resin. And obviously not every plant will have resin, but every plant will have sap. Yeah, so the distinction between the two is very important. interesting reference at the bottom there, so you guys can check that later on just for reading material. From that same text that I referenced for you, a lot of research has been done, especially in Africa and South America, looking at different plants, looking at different families, and basically observing who visits the flowers. Of course, in some instances, even though you're observing, it may not be quite easy to tell what they're collecting. As you can appreciate, if you've got a flower way up on a tall tree, like let's say a sip, the observer may be able to see what's going to it, but they're not going to be able to tell unless, of course, they do some actual collecting. And usually, when it comes down to identifying the plant sources, they would collect the bees and they collect the pollen that are on the bees, and that's a useful indicator of what plant the bee has gone to. And that's applicable for apis as well as any stingless. I put this list up just so you can appreciate, and I'll give a few slides of it, the variation, the large volume of plants which bees go to, yeah, and which they can forage on. And what I've been coming across so far when it comes to stingless bees is that they will go to a wide number of flowers once they are there. I mean, they of course have their preferences, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the resins. But in the main, they will go to a large number of flowers. Whatever is in the habitat that's available, they will go to. Yeah. I'll skip these in the interest of time. All right, and let's get on to the meat of the matter. Some of the plants that you already have in your garden, some of them that are commonly around, and which, as far as we know from the literature, stingless bees gravitate towards, either for nectar, extra floral nectar, or resins. All right. So most of you are familiar with ruku, and ruku is quite common. Something else I'll point out with these plants, you'll see I put exotic or native. I tend to have a preference for pushing native plants, and you'll see that a lot through the slides. That's not to say that we're excluding the exotics, it's just that where possible, we tend to prefer to install the local variety. Ruku is, of course, not native, but for all intents and purposes, it's been around here so long it's naturalized. A nice small tree, easy enough to put in. Stingless bees are known to visit the flower for nectar and for pollen. You will find that within the legumes, and certainly a lot of them being trees as well as the vines and the shrubs, stingless bees go towards. Again, for nectar, and within the legumes, you have a number of them that produce extra floral nectar. The clues here is included here. This is wild onion for some persons who might come across it in the forest. You're unlikely to see this most times in any urban or suburban area, unless somebody chooses to actively plant it. Matapal be the common name. Yeah. One of the trees that you might want to consider having around. Rubber, Brazilian rubber, Hevia brasilensis. And this is a good point to talk about the extra floral nectaries. So as I mentioned before, bees will visit plants for nectar. Nectar can come from two main sources, floral and extra floral. But when we speak of extra floral nectar, we're talking about nectar that's not associated with the flower per se. And so its role is entirely different. Its function is different as well. What we do know is that its chemical composition is also slightly different. As in terms of its function, it's been shown that it's primarily used as a way for the plant to attract defenders, usually an insect defender, usually an ant, which by its mere presence is then able to confer some sort of protection to the plant. But in the same time, it's not unexpected that if you have extra floral nectar that's available, insects like bees that are looking for food resource will also take advantage of this. So we come to Brazilian rubber. And Brazilian rubber is quite common. It's introduced here. We have a couple of plantations. There's one south, and there's a nice one along your Plantations Road and so on. But what is unique about it is that aside from floral nectar, which it has a lot when it's flowering, it also has a lot of extra floral nectar produced from nectaries that are on the base of the petioles, yeah, of the leaflets. And those are basically operating throughout the year. And so I mentioned earlier on that we often overlook it, but extra floral nectar as a source of food for bees and in this case, especially for stingless bees, is probably more important than floral nectar in some situations. Because whereas the flower is only available for a certain period of time, chances are you're going to find extra floral nectar throughout the year. Yeah. Now, extra floral nectar tends to vary, of course, with age of the plant part, and of course with other environmental factors, humidity and temperature and all that sort of thing. But you're on a large tree like Brazilian rubber, invariably you will find leaves that have sufficient extra floral nectar being produced. That's something that hasn't been looked at in detail for Trinidad. We know plants from the literature that do have extra floral nectar, and one can easily surmise that they play a large role in acting as a food source for your stingless bees. Okay, I'll point out some of the others as we go along. Again, a lot of the legumes are inside there, and some of the other ones that you may not know, like some of the heliconias and so forth. Guacano, again, a tree that person's seen a lot of abandoned fields and so forth. Turns out that bees love to go for the flowers when they open. You get a lot of food from there. The whole Myrtaceae family, those fragrant trees, your bay leaf and your pimento and your clove and all of these. Again, so come back to what I talked about resin. Many of you will be familiar with essential oils. Yeah, people go and buy them in the groceries and stuff like this in pharmacies. Well, essential oils are really coming from resin. And as a group in itself, the Myrtaceae give you a lot of essential oils because they have a lot of resins. They have a lot of glands that produce this. So it's not surprising that you find stingless bees gravitating to plants within the Myrtaceae, yeah, as a potential source of resins that they can then incorporate into their cells, into their hives, sorry, and even within their own body to an extent. I won't touch on that here, but resins serve a wide function, helping to maintain the microbial community, helping to prevent infections, and of course, helping to add some of the properties that we get in the honey itself. Citrus, and in this case, they are visiting the flowers, but they also will go towards the fruit. And we've had different bits of observations on this. There are farmers that will claim that yes, stingless bees are cutting holes in their grapefruit and there's oranges. And when we chatted with David, he was rather adamant that they're not doing that. They simply go into the hole after the fact. In either situation, the bees would take advantage if there's already a hole present on a fruit, of course. I mean, you would do the same thing. It's there, it's exposed. A hole is basically a break in the structure of the fruit that allows the bee to access whatever sort of fluid it wants to access there. Yeah. And of course, you know, citrus is an essential oil. Naked Indian, again, the family Burseraceae, quite common for resins. Frankincense is in this family, incense is in this family, Proteum guianensis being the common one. That has historically been extracted for its incense, which comes out as a nice sap that, well, not sap, so resin obviously that gets nice and hard, that can be used in candles and so forth. So bees gravitate towards Naked Indian. Cashew, another family, quite common. Mango is inside of there as well. So you'll notice mango, cashew, and the hog plum that we're now looking at all belong to the Anacardiaceae. Yeah, a rather important family. Hog plum is native, by the way, and we have lots of it out in the forest. In fact, more common than you'll find governor plum and some of the others that persons tend to have within their backyards. Again, pointing us to the reasons why this would make for an ideal plant that native bees would tend to gravitate towards and make use of. The cordias are inside of here. Cordia colococa is quite common in Tobago, known as manjac, climate cherry, because of how it tastes. This is a huge tree. The cordia in Trinidad that we're familiar with is Aliodora most times, or sip, as persons tends to call it. I think a few of them are flowering now. If you go out, nice white tops. If you look at some of the hillsides, again, good source of nectar for stingless bees. Zabuka, avocado, very interesting. Turns out that stingless bees are the main pollinators for Zabuca. And of course, those farmers who are fortunate to have them on their estate tend to have bumper crops. And this is well recorded from the literature. So here we have something that would be useful for farmers who are growing Zabuca and who wish to, of course, increase their crop output, would do well to probably, if they don't have stingless bees present, perhaps go out and find a few and encourage their presence, of course, by not using pesticides and all that sort of thing, and of course, not destroying the nests when you find them. Zabuca, incidentally, is an exotic, yeah, as are most of the fruits that we tend to use, including mango. Right on that list of resin-bearing trees, and this isn't introduced, is the Norfolk Island pine. We have a few of those around. You tend to find them mainly by institutions or persons who are perhaps, been able to cultivate one in their backyard. UE has one. Very nice to look at. Again, not native. But what are we talking about here? Within that family, think of pine, pitch pine and stuff. And what really makes that wood so strong and resistant to attack is the resin inside of there, which has strong antimicrobial, antifungal properties. So again, as you'd expect, the stingless bees would look for a tree like this to be able to incorporate that into their hives. I'm just going to flow through a few more. But I think we're close to 2 o'clock, Celeste. These are just a few of the more common shrubs and so forth, which you probably have in your garden already, and which you may not have thought about it, but if you left them to be, would serve as a nice food crop resource for stingless bees. So amaranthus is inside there, your local bhaji, and of course you want to leave it so that it starts to flower at the top. By the way, the flowers can be eaten and cooked just as the leaves can. So it's a source of food for you and a good one for the bees when they're flowering. All of the palms. I've put up the coconut one here, but of course coconut is introduced. We have any number of other palms, sable, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the other one that's normally up in the hills. But palms in general are good to put up, prolific when it comes to flowers and when it comes to bees that tend to those flowers. Some of the smaller things that are quite common, cosmos, and of course the native one is the pinkish variety. The yellow is introduced, but they both serve the same purpose. Quite easy to grow, quite quickly to flower, and of course a good source of nectar. Tridax, coat buttons, numerous, introduced but naturalized for all intents and purposes. Literally, you can find this any and everywhere you look. Anybody who's ever had a lawn that's not kept well, this springs up quite nicely. And as I said before, the reason why I've included a number of these little things is one of the thrusts for us is to try to encourage persons not only to go native, but to maintain habitats as natural as possible. If you were to leave your yard, your backyard, to grow wild, you will find a number of shrubs, things that you may consider weeds, but are plants which in of their own will flower almost year round. And so those are providing the majority of your food sources for animals, insects like stingless bees, especially when the larger trees are not available. But of course, unfortunately, those are the things that we tend to clear because we find that they're weeds, Mimosa is inside of there, and we might have one later on. But you want to try and encourage those things. You encourage them, and chances are you're then providing a good food source, a good resource for your stingless bees. Quickly run through the others. Tecoma is there. That's your Tobago Cooey, nice and yellow. This tends to get planted a lot. People looking to beautify around buildings and parks and stuff like this. Very nice yellow flowers. Jatropha, physic nut. Again, physic nut, without getting into the detail, and I could probably share a link for those who want it, has extrafloral glands on it within the family, within the genus, sorry, that we know of in this particular one. And so it acts as a source of extrafloral nectar for stingless bees. The plant itself is slightly toxic, so it's unlikely that they're using any of the resins from it for anything. But again, an interesting plant, which is also medicinal in value, which is another criteria to consider when you are choosing what plant to put in. Plants should serve a multifunction. Food for the bees, food for the pollinators, yes, but also as a resource for you. And a herbal resource is as most important as they get. Caliandra is inside there. The caliandras, some of them are known to have extra floral nectar. I've included Gliricidia because this is quite common, even though it's an exotic. It's in a number of old estates and backyards, going up from fence posts and stuff. Flowers are plants are easy to grow, sorry, flowers quite readily, and a good source of nectar. And of course, we have the smaller things like sweet broom. This is all over the place. Of course, you may not see it because it's getting cut a lot, but things like this, again, flowering continuously. Coralita, coral vine, again, very popular, introduced, but bees love it. Once you can tolerate the fact that once you get it in, it's going to be hard for it to get out because it does root itself pretty good. In fact, it's an invasive in some countries. But again, if you're not too quite worried about that and you're not worried about it running along your house and your fence posts and so forth, this is an excellent source of food for stingless bees. And last but not least, I've included here DJPE. One of those nice plants for those of you into herbal medicines that's good to wash your eyes and that sort of thing. I make no claims on that statement, of course, but we know it's a traditionally been used by lots of people. Again, a good source of nectar. Right, we have a few references there for those who wish to read some more. And I think I'm within time, so I will end there. Celeste. Sorry, I sounded a bit rushed, but let's get on. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Shane, Mr. Bala, for sharing this important information on our plants, especially our native plants. It's a very insightful series on our local flora. I wish to thank all members of the audience for your questions. While Mr. Bala was presenting, I tried to give as many responses as possible to these questions in the Q&A, but we will certainly capture and share in the Facebook post of the recording. The queries have suggested that we perhaps need to deliver a part 2 on this topic because persons have been asking about what the bees look like, what their hives look like, how do they get hives, how to manage bees. So we have a lot of material that came out of our workshop series, and as Shane may have indicated, we are hoping to post the recordings of the workshop series online once we have finished final editing, and that provides a lot of the information. But certainly there's information I feel that we can pull out and put into another webinar. So we look at close, and I thank our presenters once again, Dr. Demple-Wolf, Lena Demple-Wolf, and Mr. Shane Bala for their contributions. I thank you, our online audience, for your interest and your very, very active participation in today's webinar. Please remember the recording will be posted to the project's YouTube channel and Facebook page, and responses to any unanswered questions will be posted on the Facebook page. So continue to follow us on BES-Net.TT on Facebook and Instagram, as well as TikTok, for information on upcoming project activities, including these monthly webinars. We look forward to your interest and engagement in the BES-Net TT project. I thank you again, and goodbye. Be safe.